that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the church. Message in a minute.
Hi, and welcome to another Message in a Minute. Good to be back with you again today. Today, what we're going to talk about, well, I have a very simple question I want to ask. Can you follow instructions? Pretty simple, isn't it? But you know what? Throughout the Bible and even in our own lives, many of us have had problems doing that. Recently, I had an opportunity to accompany a family member to court. And if you've been to court, you know, sometimes you sit there quite a while as they go through the docket. Well, as I was waiting for our case to come up, I had an opportunity to listen to all the other people who went up before the judge. And even though they had a lot of excuses and they had lawyers and they had everything else, but you know one thing that it boiled down to? The reason they were there, for the most part, is because they could not follow instructions. You know, and that reminds me of a passage in the Bible in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1 through 13. And I call this the tragedy of Uzzah. And let me give you the backstory. King David, who was the king at the time, he had gone to war with the Philistines, who had previously had defeated Israel and had taken the Ark of the Covenant. That's the box that was in the tabernacle that had the Ten Commandments. The Ark of the Covenant now was with the Philistines, and David did not like that. He went, defeated the Philistines, and he wanted now to bring that box of the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, back to Jerusalem. Well, what David had done, he went and got a cart. It was a new cart. He built it new, connected it to a couple of oxen, and he was bringing that back to the city. And they were all happy because the ark was coming back. Along the way, the oxen stumbled, and one of the young men who was standing beside the cart, whose name was Uzzah, he reached out to grab the ark and keep it from falling off the cart. Well, you know what? God struck him dead instantly because it angered God, his action. And we probably wonder, wow, why would that anger God? Because the young man was just trying to do what he thought was right, was to protect the ark. Well, let me tell you, God had given some specific instructions earlier on how that ark was to be transported. There was a special way that the Levites, when they took down the tabernacle, how they were supposed to take poles, run it through the rings on the ark, and pick it up by this poles, and then they carried the ark to the next place it was to go. He did not give them instructions to put it on a cart. He did not give them instructions to have it pulled by oxen. So God was very specific. If you go to Numbers chapter 4, verse 5 through 15, you'll see some of those instructions. Also, if you go back into Exodus, he talks about how that ark was, and everything in the tabernacle was to be transported. And see, then David became very angry when he saw what had happened. Now, he also, not only was he angry, but he was also afraid. And here's why he was afraid of God, because David realized that he had been disobedient to God's instructions. He understood that his lack of ability to follow instructions caused the very death of another individual. Now, fast forward, we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 1 through 15. Now you'll see how the ark did make it back into Jerusalem because it was carried in the proper manner. They carried it with the sticks, they picked it up, and they took it the way that God had instructed them to take it in the beginning. And it made everyone happy, everyone was rejoicing. As a matter of fact, and we're all familiar with this part of the story, this is where David entered the city and he danced out of his clothing because now the ark was residing back in Jerusalem. But the key to this whole thing was David had to learn how to follow instructions. You see, God has given us, as mankind, what I like to call some basic instructions before leaving Earth. Or, if you look at the acronym, the Bible. You see that the Bible contains everything that we need to make it through this life. And not only make it through this life, but to have life and have it more abundantly. You know, if you look at, and I think about 23 times throughout the Bible, this phrase, keep my commandments, is used. From Exodus all the way through in the New Testament, even into the book of John and a couple places thereafter. Keep my commandments. Now, speaking of the book of John, the Gospel of John, I love that because he ties the term, if you love me, in front of that. Meaning that if you love me, keep my commandments. And many times we say, I love you, Lord, I love you, God, but we're unwilling to follow his instructions. Now, when we learn to exhibit those characteristics of being able to follow instructions, that's when we have the promise of life. And the promise of life we have it more abundantly. Following simple instructions. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the church.
He that has an ear, let